There's so many things that were said in this show that are interesting thematically, philosophically, and even spiritually, that I think we have to address them. So in episode 2, we learn that Ammit and Khonshu do have a similar goal. As Egyptian gods, they do have a similar goal. We also did learn that Khonshu was basically exiled from the group of gods. I don't know if they're going to call that the Ennead. They didn't call it that in episode 2, but Khonshu was apparently exiled for some reason that we don't know. But both of them want to punish the unjust. Both of them want to punish the unjust. Ammit and her avatar, who's Arthur Harrow, who, by the way, used to be Khonshu's avatar. So he's kind of like just cruising around to different Egyptian gods, being their avatars. Ammit,
as Ethan Hawke does.
As Ethan Hawke, yeah, exactly. In his personal life, I think I think he said that publicly. He hasn't said that publicly. They want, so Ammit and Arthur want to remove. This is what he actually says: remove people's choices by preventing them from choosing evil. So I'm going to circle back around to that, because that in and of itself is fascinating. That's not my question actually yet, because Khonshu then wants to punish people after they've committed an evil act. And then Stephen asks this really fascinating question, and this is what I want to get further into, because he says, well, what about innocent people? And I find that question really, really interesting, because when it comes to judgment from spiritual entities, because these are Egyptian gods, once worshipped by humans, maybe still worshipped by some humans, when gods are judging humans, the question is, Daryl, who is innocent? Who's innocent? What does that even mean? What does the concept of innocence mean when you think about like Ammit killing people and Khonshu killing people? What is innocence? What does that entail? What does that mean? Like, how should we think about innocence?
I mean, it seems like it would have to be perfection, right? Because you have one God who's punishing what you've already done, and one God who is punishing you for anything you're gonna do.
Right.
It certainly doesn't seem like Ammit has a scale, right? Like something is evil enough. Like if you're going to kill somebody, then I'll go ahead and get rid of you now.
Right.
If you're going to cheat on your taxes, maybe I'll let that go. But it doesn't seem like there's a scale. So it seems like the only way to be innocent is to be perfect, which is not a thing.
Well, that's what I find so interesting, because even as Stephen asked the question, he said, like, well, what about babies? Like, you going to kill babies? And I think it's setting up an interesting philosophical conflict. And I say that because we can pretty much tell that Ammit lives in the world of what I would call fantasy. It is a world that assumes that we could create heaven on earth and that a utopia is possible. Right? This is like as if we could only eliminate all the evil people, then there would be heaven, because then there wouldn't be any evil people. But the first question I'd have to ask is like, well, what is innocence in your eyes? Because like you said, that doesn't seem to be a definition. So then I'm wondering, like, well, what if we just have a difference of opinion, right? Like, what if there's something that's kind of minor? My wife and I were talking about this the other day, and this is something that people will take two sides on listening to this podcast. We're driving along, and there's a lady driving next to us who had her little dog, on her lap. And my wife said, oh, I hate it when people do that. The dog is really cute and is looking out the window, but I hate it when people do that because it's so unsafe for the dog. Like, because if you get in a car accident, the dog's probably dead, right? And I thought to myself, I made it, of course, this is what I do. I go, yeah, so interesting question. Is that a sin? Right? Like, is it a sin to put your dog on your lap, knowing that, because the dog is comforting you, so you feel good about the dog being on your lap. But objectively, we know it's more dangerous to do. I feel good about responding to a text while I'm driving, but we know objectively it's not good to respond to text while you're driving, because you might kill somebody else. And so she was kind of like, well, I don't know if it's a sin, right? Like, is it what? So this lady has an opinion. I want my dog on my lap. We have an opinion. You shouldn't have your dog on your lap. Does Ammit say, oh, yeah, well, I side with the lady driving the car, so Jay and Jessica, you're actually in the wrong, so you're going down? I mean, how would you even begin? So what I'm basically asking is, And I think what you alluded to is we don't know what Ammit's actual moral standard even is.
Yeah.
It's
And what's the
totally
point
puzzling.
too?
Yeah.
What's the point? Because so far, and I mean, I'm assuming, I'm hoping that Moon Knight, whether it's Stephen Grant or Mark Spector or whoever it turns out to be,
Yeah.
will be some sort of the vessel for this in the show. But so far, it's just um, some nebulous version of right, an
Right.
absolute version of wrong,
Right.
and no way to travel between the two. There's no
Yeah.
way. There's no way to improve. There's no redemption. There's no sanctification.
Yep.
There's no way to get yourself off of Ammit's naughty list or Khonshu's naughty list. You know what I mean? Like you're
Right.
either going to die after you do it, or you're going to die before you do it. Either way, you suck, and you're going to get punished for it.
Right.
So how do you grow beyond that? There's got
Yeah.
to be something. Like, why does that exist if not to make everything better overall? You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Well, and that's an even more fascinating question because what they're kind of showing you in the show, and I think that there's a dark underbelly that they have not revealed yet. But what they're kind of showing you in the show is that Amit's version is actually seemingly a little bit better for people than so far, because I think they're going to reveal something else soon, and I'll talk about what that I think they're going to do. But Amit's version through Arthur, they live in a cool little commune, man. Like all those people are supposedly never going to do anything bad in the future. And that little commune is pretty nice. Now, I think there's a dark side to that. I'll get into that in a minute. But you'll notice that Mark Spector, on the other hand, is not because of his multiple, I don't know what the technical term is, not multiple personality disorder or whatever it's called, right?
Dissociative disorder.
Yeah, disassociative.
Something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But you can tell Mark is suffering, not necessarily from that, but from the fact that he's having to work for Khonshu. He does not want Layla to work for Khonshu. So he doesn't believe Khonshu is 100% good. And
Right.
he flipped out on Steven in the courtyard when Steven was talking to him through the mirror to the
Mhm.
point where you go, well, this guy's not doing well, right? Like he feels like he has to do something on behalf of Khonshu. Khonshu actually says to him, "You think you own this body? It belongs to me." So Mark definitely feels like he is possessed to the point where he has to do things against his will. Steven for sure feels like he has to do things against his will. Um, and I think that the dark underside of the Ammit, because right now I can't find a reason why Ammit is technically wrong, besides it seems really creepy. And I think it's going to be that they're actually mind controlling those people to prevent them from doing evil. I think it's going to be because you notice
Oh
that
yeah, there's got to be something there.
yeah, because every single person got up and like acted like they were like, "Oh, great, something's gonna happen," right? Like, but they all did so like in unison, like they kind of move in unison, which kind of tells me like that they may be even having some possession issues from Ammit's side, or at least that Arthur is kind of influencing them in some way. So going back to what you said, innocence seems like it must be perfection, and if it's not, then who gets to decide? Who gets to decide whose version of morality is best? And how would you, so as we watch these kind of shows, they're usually dealing with some sort of value system, right? Like this is what superheroes deal with all the time. You and I have talked about this a lot. And you and I have even come up with like what the definition of a hero is and what the definition of a villain is. And we've talked a lot about that on the show. But when you think about like a moral standard that these gods could be trying to uphold, in your mind, like what about that moral standard should we be paying attention to in the show? Like what are some of the things that you would say are associated with a high moral standard that you and I and most people would agree is a good high moral standard?
It's hard to know because I don't even feel like we know what people are being punished for. Like there was
Mm,
that old lady, right? That in the first episode that
yeah.
Harrow, he read her and then he killed her. We don't
Right.
know why. He didn't say what she was going to do
Right.
that was going to qualify her as evil. And also, by the way, how did she live so long before doing something that counts as evil? I mean, she wasn't young, but anyway, that's beside
Right.
the point.
Right.
So that's the thing. I don't know. I don't know what those standards are because we don't really get those answers.
Mm,
And I think what's interesting about it is there's going to have to be some version of redemption brought into this
mm,
to help make sense of it. Um, because otherwise, I just don't understand why it's happening. You know what I mean?
totally.
Like it seems like that Stephen Grant is sort of he's crazy. They they want us to believe that he's crazy and this stuff
Right.
is his brain is broken and stuff like that. But really, if you look at it, he's kind of the only one that's not crazy, right? Like he's the only
Exactly.
one that sees the whole and
Yeah.
knows that wait a minute, this is stupid. Like why are we doing all this? Like what about the chance for people to get better,
Yeah.
you know?
Exactly.
And I refuse, that sounds harsh. I don't think this is the kind of show that's going to overlook that. You know what I mean?
Totally
I think
agree.
the quality of this is going to bring that in eventually. This
Yeah.
isn't the Batman. I don't think they're going to completely overlook redemption and just talk about vengeance for 3 hours. Sorry.
No, you gotta do it. You gotta
not,
do it.
not
Well,
what we're
I
talking
did
about.
think it was interesting that this show is dealing with vengeance, and that movie was dealing with vengeance as well. I thought that was an interesting, like, what about our culture is feeling like vengeance is something that we need to address, and at this point in time, um, and I think it's important because I think that what the Batman was saying was we see the genuine. I mean, Batman is you cannot convince me otherwise that Batman was trying to say that the January 6th rioters were essentially Riddler's followers. Obviously, different things going on. I don't think the January 6th rioters were trying to kill people, although they very much threatened some of the politicians. Um, but and the end goal was kind of like, look, vengeance isn't the way we should behave. Like vengeance isn't the value system that we all think would be better. And I do think that's a message that we need, because I mean, like, even when you see someone that has been as respected culturally speaking in America as Will Smith slap somebody on the face in the Oscars, you'd go, dude, vengeance isn't just like you can't just do vengeance whenever you want. You can't just get vengeance whenever you want to. Like, what are we doing here? So I think you're right. I think that they need to solve. I think Khonshu is definitely not good. Even when he says, "You think you own this body, but it belongs to me." Even when he says that, it's like that is not something that we are going to, as humans, say, "Oh, wait a minute, you're saying someone owns someone else's body?" Like, we have an inherent reaction of like, "That's not right," right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think this is what's really fascinating about being a human being is that, like, I was talking about this a little bit with Josh, and you and I are more aligned on our spiritual perspectives than Josh and I would be, right? Because he's more of a secular humanist, like we talked about on the show. I'm a Christ follower. You're a Christ follower. So when I look at these things, I instantly ask myself, like, what value system is it that Khonshu believes he can stand for? What value system is it that Ammit thinks that she can stand for? And then how does that match up against what my value system would be, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
that's the weird thing about gods in the
yeah,
Marvel universe. Um, and I think in the DC universe too, any of these things is it seems like gods are all powerful, right? And they can do all
right.
these things. We'll talk about that more later on, but they have all of this power and they create things and they're at the center of creation and there's all these things they can do and they're absolute,
Yeah.
but they have zero nuance. Like all of the
Right.
nuance comes from humanity.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and I think, um, you know, God, as you and I believe in him,
Mhm.
is way more nuanced than we will ever be, you
Ah.
know? Or
Mm.
he understands more nuance than we ever will.
Mm.
Like he's more absolute, he's perfect. We're not like we screw up, he doesn't screw up. He's better than we are, but I don't think he is oblivious to
Mm.
the nuance that comes with trying to accept his gift and lived by the standards that he sets forth. Like he
Yeah.
understands what that looks like for us. Whereas gods in these comics and stuff like that, it seems like they have something to learn from humanity.
Right.
Which so it's a weird. I don't know if that answers your question. Honestly, don't remember what your question was, but
Well, at this point, we're off the questions, and we're just talking about this
yeah,
concept, because I think, well, you're getting at a concept that I think is really fascinating, and that is that uh when we see the stories of the Egyptian gods, which was a major spiritual belief system, we're talking like 2000 BC and even further back. Um I'm not a historian, so don't quote me on that. Go look it up if you want to know the exact time frame. But I'm just giving you context. Is like this goes way, way back. in that time frame, whether, and then we saw like the Norse gods, which, you know, Thor is going to be a Norse god, the representative of a Norse god eventually. When we see those gods are actually, I'm going to say they're written. Somebody might believe that they're actually gods that exist. I'm going to say that they're written. I'm going to say that these are not true gods, that they are written by human beings to understand the world a little bit better. That's what it feels like to me. And why does it feel like that to me? It feels like that to me because they're very human behaving, right? Like they act like humans. They get in affairs with each other. Like if you go read about the Egyptian gods, definitely that society was trying to tell itself things about what it should be and how it should be and how they should behave, which are generally speaking what gods do, right? They tell us like what moral systems we should think about and adhere to. And these gods seem very human in their behavior. They don't seem like for example, I think you and I would say that there's nuance, like you said, but there's not a moral quandary about like what God should do or he shouldn't do.
Right.
But Khonshu is like, he seems like he might be wrestling with what he should do or shouldn't do. Like, and Ammit too, like they seem like they have different perspectives and they're both gods. So,
Or even if they're not wrestling with it, they have no regard for how it affects their subjects or their people, which is completely antithetical to God as we believe in him. Like,
yeah,
yes, he's absolute. Yes, he has standards. Yes, he's set apart. But the gospel story, right? He made a gigantic sacrifice to create a way for us to still have access to his goodness.
Exactly. Well, and to that point too, like if you start to look at, so what I would argue is, and this is why I think we as humans reject the idea that Ammit's view is a good idea, is that if those people end up being highly controlled, then yes, they can prevent the ability of doing evil. If Ammit, let's just say Ammit, just assume for a second that Ammit had a perfect idea of how human beings should behave. Because you and I would say we believe that God has a perfect way for humans to behave.
Mm-hmm.
We would also both say that no human is capable of achieving that, right? So that's what we would say. But let's just say for a second that Ammit had the same perspective as what we believe God has, which is a perfect view of how humanity should interact with each other and with him, or with, in this case, with her. Then if Ammit says, I'm going to eliminate all the evil people, and anybody who I don't eliminate, I therefore have to remove the choice of them to do evil. Well, now we're going all the way back to what we would call the Garden of Eden scenario, right? And that is that in order for you to have free will, you sort of have to be able to do evil, right? Whether it's intentional or not intentional,
You have to have the choice.
you have to have a choice. Otherwise, you're an automaton. You're not any different than a robot, right? And then the struggle is, how do I choose to do good? And by the way, that's not like easy, difficult. That's like nuanced levels of like, well, in this situation, do I have to behave differently than in the situation I encountered yesterday? And the truth is, you probably do have to interact differently. And I think what's interesting about the Ammit Khonshu scenario is that you said earlier, because you said there's no opportunity for redemption, nor is there opportunity for sanctification. Sanctification being the process of becoming a better human, right?
Right.
And that's a fascinating insight, I think, because what it means is that neither Ammit nor Khonshu allows for what we would say God allows for, and that is for us to be repentant and us to say, I did sin, I shouldn't have sinned, I need to make restoration with someone else because of my sin. And that doesn't seem to be on the table with either of these two gods at this point in time.
Yeah, and if it's not, then to quote you, what is their why? Like, what's the point? Like, why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they punishing humanity? Do they care about humanity and love it to some degree so that they want it to be a certain way?
Exactly.
If that's the case, all you're doing is killing everybody. So you're not improving anything. You're not giving anybody a chance to learn your ideal and come up to it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's missing. And
Yeah.
then it doesn't even seem like they really love humanity. Honestly, they seem pretty annoyed by humans. So
Yep.
it's
Yep.
just kind of like, what's the point? Which I think is part of what's going on in Steven's head. Is he learns more about what's going on around him. He's like,
Yes.
this is crazy.
Yes. Oh, totally agree. Totally agree.
Because I don't think Marvel, the Disney Marvel Feige machine, is going to give us a story that is 100% about vengeance
No.
with no redemption whatsoever.
No.
They're just not going to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
they gave us Bucky Barnes. They're not going to do something
Exactly.
like that.
Exactly.
So
No, it seems like what it's gearing up to be. What it seems like it's gearing up to be is that this person with dissociative disorder is fighting this internal battle of like, I feel compelled to. There's a God that saved me from death, and I feel like I am compelled to, as Khonshu says, your body belongs to me, and if I don't serve him, then he's gonna get Layla, and I can't have that happen. So I have to distance myself from all of those people and follow this guy, even though I don't want to. But hopefully, he'll release me from my contract, and we can kind of just let it go at that. And what it feels like is that Steven is the part of the Mark Spector Steven individual that is basically saying there is a right way, and it's none of the ways that everybody else is talking about. And everybody may perceive me as the crazy one, but I'm technically the one that should be in control of this body because I would be doing the most righteous things with it, right?
yeah,
Um, and I think what's going to have to happen is that we feel like Steven is the weak one and that Mark is the strong one. And I think what they're basically showcasing in this show is that without Steven, Mark would be a complete psychopath, and things would never go the way that they should go. So that's what I'm thinking is going to happen in this show. That's the way that we're going to go, is that, Steven's going to be the one that's the good guy, and Mark's going to be the one that needs to learn how to adapt, and they'll need to learn to work together. But any other takes on episode 2 that you want to throw out there?
I don't know. I was just thinking about the opposite of that. That's interesting that without Steven, Mark would be a psychopath. It seems like without Mark, Steven would be a pretty happy, normal dude.
True. Yeah, it's true.
He would have gone on a date with a nice girl, works at a museum, seems like a nice guy. He's kind to everybody. I'm like, I don't really see what Mark brings to the table that Steven's missing. But
yeah, I totally agree. Unless there's some sort of like
maybe confidence or
right,
yeah.
exactly. We did get a question from a Facebook user. For some reason, StreamYard a lot of times will block Facebook user names from us unless they fill out their information or whatever. So I don't know who this is, but if you're in the chat, you can let me know who this is. But I think this is a really good question that picks up right where we're leaving off with this discussion before we transition into the next one. And it is, can you be evil if you're the only person left alive? So I'll let you answer that question first because I have a take on that. But I want to hear what you have to say. Can you be evil if you're the only person left alive?
It depends on the standard, right?
Mm,
I mean,
mm.
based on I don't even know what the standard is in this show, so it's hard to answer that. It
Yeah.
certainly seems like it has more to do with how you treat people. So I guess maybe in that sense, no.
Mm,
Um, in the sense of the Christian faith, I would say yes, you can
yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. If evil is all wrapped up in how you treat other people, then maybe even then, like just because you don't have anybody to be evil towards doesn't mean you wouldn't if you could. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I'll give you 2 extra answers to this because, by the way, this is from Dale Wentland, our buddy.
Oh, Dale.
Yeah. In fact, Dale's going to be on this show. By the way, special preview. Dale's going to be on this show in a couple weeks. So,
Nice.
special thanks to Dale for being on the show and also for asking this question. This is a good question. So, I think the answer to this question is yes, and I'll tell you why I think it's yes. Because I don't think that imperfection. So there's 2 things that we need to define here. Are you evil if you make mistakes? And some people will answer that question with no, right? No, if you just make mistakes, you're just a human. Like, you're not evil, you're just a human person. I would argue that a mistake is evil because it has an effect, right? It has a rippling effect on other people that you didn't maybe intend evil, but it's a mistake to drink too much and drive. And if you kill somebody else, is that person not, did they not do something that was evil? Like, we would call that as evil. Maybe we wouldn't say like, oh man, they did something that we would. Now, I also believe that most evil people do things that we would also do, put in certain circumstances that we should not be in. But I think that we can be evil to the environment, right? And I think that if you're a spiritual person, you could make a very clear argument that you can be evil to God. So if you believe in God, you can be evil to God. And I think that we inherently do things that are even mistakes that we make can be evil. And I think that, like, for example, the example that I gave when we started this conversation about seeing the lady driving with the dog on her lap. Well, she's not committing that evil against another human being. Not, well, evil. I mean, I don't want to label this lady. See, that sounds so harsh. But she's making a decision that's maybe not the best decision for that dog, right? And I would argue that, well, just as we should be gracious, just as we should be kind, just as we should be loving to each other, we owe that to our environment as well. We owe that to animals as well. So I don't know if there's a way to. I don't believe that there's a way to remove evil from anyone's potential future or their actual past. I don't think there's a way to remove evil from the scenario that we find ourselves in. Because I also think that you could say that even though the world is set up, this is just something that you and I probably would believe, Daryl, but maybe not everybody would believe this. The fact that there are natural disasters is to a certain extent evil. It is a result of what we would say, the way we would define this is God allows things to happen in the world, and some of the things that he allows, whether it's human caused or just a natural consequence of our entire creation being subject to sin, which you could be called evil. I think that those things, I mean, when a natural disaster kills thousands of people, that's evil, right? Like, that's not what we want to happen. That's like devastating for families. It's devastating for communities. It's devastating for us. So yeah, I think that you can be evil even if you're the only person left alive. But that's a heady question. I love that question, Dale. That's a fantastic question.